Chapter 11 of the Boy Scouts in Front of Warsaw. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Boy Scouts in Front of Warsaw, or In the Wake of War, by George Durston, Chapter 11. The Red Cross Car. When Warren was dismissed from the hospital, he found himself being stared at by Ivan in a very perplexing manner. Finally, he demanded the reason. Ivan laughed. "You look so clean," he said. "Your face does not go with the rest of you, those ragged clothes and all that. Besides, I have not seen what your natural face looked like for a few days. I had forgotten just what you did look like." Warren smiled. "Just the same, it did seem good to clean up a little," he said. "However, just to oblige you, I'll put on a few frills." He stooped and rubbed his hands in some plaster dust and transferred it to his face. Ivan studied the change. "That's better," he said. "As long as we have to wear these clothes, I think we had better look the part. There is one thing certain, though. We are dressed exactly as we were in Warsaw when we were visiting our friends, the thieves. I wish we could get some other clothes." "I hadn't thought of that," said Warren. "I wish we could change, but how can we?" "I don't know," said Ivan. "Certainly we can't risk having those people see us. We will have to be cautious." "Where shall we go, I wonder?" mused Warren. "I don't suppose it matters now," said Ivan. "It is so late in the afternoon. Tomorrow morning we will have to watch the market. They will be sure to come for more provisions." "True enough," said Warren. "Let's go down to the central station and see if the trains are running again." The boys sauntered down through the streets without being molested by the sharp-eyed soldiers who patrolled the way. They found the station a busy place. The trains were once more running, on broken schedules of course, but everything was so nearly adjusted to the usual order that there was transportation for the hundreds who were eagerly seeking passage. There were a great many foreigners, carefully clutching their passports and hurrying out of the country. At the back of the station stood an automobile, a long, low, racing roadster. "We had a ride in her last night," said Warren, as he approached and recognized the machine. "And it was some ride, wasn't it, Ivan?" "It certainly was," said Ivan, smiling. "What's the red flag cross on it, I wonder?" "The princess has given it over to the hospital, I suppose," said Warren. "No one will stop it now. Wonder who drives it. I'm sorry for anyone who rides with the crazy guy who tried to run it last night." "Here is the chauffeur now," said Ivan, stepping back as a dark, burly man approached the machine and took a package from the toolbox. "He is a new one," said Warren. They wandered around the corner of the building and mingled with the throngs waiting for the train. It came puffing in, and as the crowd pressed forward, Warren heard a familiar, coarse, whining voice behind him. He looked, and, as he did so, he was conscious of Ivan, who, with the quickness of a bird, slipped between two people and was out of sight. Instantly Warren followed him. They met behind a truck loaded with boxes. Warren was shaking. "Did you see?" he asked. "Yes," said Ivan in a low voice. "Eleanor and Rika too. What are we going to do?" "I don't know," said Warren. "Just do what we have to do when the time comes. Don't risk them another hour. Eleanor looks half dead. Keep out of sight and watch for a chance. Don't let the girls see you, any more than the women. They would give it away. Sure, come on." He slipped quickly through the crowd, only a boy and unnoticed. Behind, at his heels, came a thin lad, soiled and ragged. It was Prince Ivan, prince of one of the greatest houses in Warsaw, but his own father would not have recognized him. Together they slyly watched the two women in front of them who, each with a child, begged pitifully of the travellers. The woman who had Rika held her in her arms, but poor little Eleanor, on foot, reached a tiny hand towards the passing throng and fearfully glanced at her ugly jailer as she did so. The train remained on the track. It was evidently going to make up a section. The women wandered here and there, and finally approached a big packing case near the station door. Here they stood, evidently consulting. One woman slyly showed the other a handkerchief full of kopecks. Then, while the boys scarcely dared to breathe, they seated the two children on the box, and with a fearful threat, which caused the face of Eleanor to turn even paler, they hurried into the waiting room and turned towards the ticket window. "Now," said Warren, "and be quick." He ran up to the children, and taking his sister in his arms, pressed his hand over her mouth until he had spoken a word in her ear. Then, followed by Ivan carrying Rika, he walked steadily around the corner of the platform. Before him stood the roadster with the Red Cross flag. Without an instant's hesitation, he slipped into the driver's seat, Eleanor still in his arms. He thrust her between his knees as Ivan took the other seat and tucked little Rika out of sight in the same manner. As he did so, they heard a series of hoarse screams, and the two women, beating the air and wringing their hands, came rushing round the corner. Warren started the car full speed, and they started with a jerk that almost threw them out. Looking behind, Ivan saw the women point to the car, and, to his dismay, a soldier on a motorcycle jumped from his machine and ran up to them. As the car sped down the long avenue, Ivan saw a last glimpse of the man returning to his machine. They were followed. "They are after us," he said to Warren. "What with?" asked Warren, his eyes on the road. There was no other machine. "A soldier on a motorcycle. Make the first turn you can." Warren whipped the little racer round one curve and then another. He was thinking deeply. Eleanor commenced to cry. "Don't let them get me, Worry," she begged. "You are all right, dear," he answered. Then to Ivan, "I have it. Didn't you say you knew that Princess What's-her-name that owns this car?" "Yes, a little," said Ivan. "Well, you could make her recognize whose son you are, couldn't you?" "Of course," said Ivan. "Well," said Warren, "we can't get anywhere with this car, and the only thing for us to do is to go to the hospital as quickly as we can, and you get hold of that princess and do some explaining. You see, she stands in with both sides because of the hospital. It's her own sister's house, isn't it?" "Yes," said Ivan, "and that's the only thing to do. This is a Red Cross car now, and there will be a big fuss about it." "Where are we, anyway?" said Warren, slowing down to regulation speed. "Turn to your left and ahead for 3 blocks, then once to the right, and you will see the palace in the distance," said Ivan. They swept on, reached the marble steps of the building, stopped the car, and Warren leapt to the ground. He looked at his little sister. He could not speak, but held out his arms, and she sprang into them. She clung to him, trembling, and calling his name over and over while he pressed kisses on her pale little cheeks. With Ivan still holding Rika, they hurried up the steps, just as the soldier on the motorcycle whirled to the curb. He leapt from his seat and followed them, talking furiously in German, but the boys were so close to the open door that they slipped inside before the man could lay a hand upon them. A nurse came up, and a doctor, and the boys commenced both at once, one in Polish and the other in English, to explain matters. The doctor looked grave. No one would dream that the two thin, pale, ragged little girls were anything but the beggars that they looked to be, and the doctor shook his head. Ivan stamped his foot. "I want the princess," he said. "She will straighten this out. Someone send for the princess," he demanded. "I think she is out," said the nurse, "but I will send." She gave a message to an assistant, and they waited in silence while the girl was gone. She returned in a moment. "The princess is not here," she said, "but Madame, her sister, is coming." As she spoke, the door opened, and the lovely face of Princess Olga appeared. "What is the trouble?" she asked of the doctor, and glanced at the group before her. One low cry she gave, one spring, and little Rika was folded to her breast. The baby arms were close around her neck, the little face hidden, while the princess murmured loving names and strained the little form close to her heart. Warren was the first to speak. He turned to Ivan. "Well, what do you know about that?" he said solemnly in English. The doctor turned to Ivan and plied him with questions. Presently the princess looked up. Who are you? She asked, noting the pale child at his side. My name is Morris, Warren Morris, said Warren. He would have explained further, but the princess, rising, lifted her head and, looking reverently up, said simply, God is good. Come with me. Imperiously she led the way down the great hall, now full of cots, and to a narrow door. She opened this and pushed Warren through ahead of her. And Evelyn, poor broken-hearted Evelyn, saw him as he came. Then she had him in her arms, and for once Warren could not kiss her enough or hug her hard enough. But he had to be shared with Eleanor, who commenced to look happy once more. Where is father? Asked Warren doubtfully, when Evelyn seemed assured that he was real, and that she actually had Eleanor back again. Out with the princess, said Evelyn. Then, for the first time, she noticed that the princess was gone, and the door shut, and they were alone. Warren, you must be very good to father, said Evelyn gently. He has suffered more than I ever knew anyone could. He takes all the blame for everything. Well, said Warren stubbornly, a lot of it has been his fault. That doesn't matter now, said Evelyn. Father is not to blame for the forgetfulness and selfishness in his work that we find so hard to bear. His parents are the ones to blame. They thought he was such a bright child that everything should be made secondary to his needs. And then our dear mother went right on spoiling him. And now we, who are his children, can't expect to make him over. We have just got to remember that he is a truly great man, in his own line, and we are very proud of him. Well, we are older now, and things won't be so hard for us. You bet we are older, said Warren. I don't expect to feel any older when I am 90 than I do now. But you are right about father. I have felt pretty sore, sis, I confess, and when I thought that you were dead and Eleanor lost for good, it didn't seem as though I could forgive him. You are right about his people. Folks have no right to let a kid run the whole place like that, even if it is to develop his brain. I'll tell you one thing, if I ever have kids of my own, I'm going to bring them up after a plan of my own. Evelyn smiled. I hope it will work, Warry, she said. Warren looked savage. It will, you can bet, he said. I will make them go to school, of course, but they will begin to qualify for the Boy Scouts when they are about 3 years old. And they will learn to shoot and know first aid when they're about 4, and a lot of other things when they are 5 or so. Evelyn groaned. Oh, I'm sorry for those children, Warren, she laughed. Well, perhaps I will give them a little more time. But they have got to understand that efficiency is as necessary when they are 16 as when they are 60. Do you remember those chaps we saw in Switzerland? They were way up in their studies. You know, I went to school with a fellow one day, but when school was out, they were doing things worthwhile. And the fellow I knew had the dandiest rifle I ever saw. He said it was a prize from the government for target shooting. And he knew how to handle that gun, too. He said there was a fine for carelessness with firearms. Even these Germans, I've seen dozens of fellows, no older than I am. They are hard as nails and fit every minute. Say, what's father going to do? He demanded. Are we going to spend our lives here, or are we going home? Father does not yet know that you are here, you know, Evelyn reminded him. He ought to be here soon now. Let's get him to go home as soon as we can, said Warren. I've seen about as much as I can stand of these horrors. He put his arm around Evelyn's shoulders and embraced both dear sisters. Evelyn, we will never be the same children again, he said sadly. Oh, I'm homesick for America. I want to go home to Princeton. I want to have it come 4th of July and hear the crackers going off and see the flag hanging out of store windows and upside down and wrong side on to people's lawns in the way they almost always hang it. I want to shout, Hooray for America! I am dead sick of this, sissy. I want to go where I belong. Poor old Warren, said Evelyn. I know how you feel. I want to go too. But you can't just shake the dust of Europe off like that, you know. We've made friends, good friends here. And you'll have to keep in touch with the Polish Boy Scouts. You can't shirk that, you know. No, of course not, agreed Warren. I just want to go home and soak up on America for a while. I've got a lot of things to tell those fellows too, he said solemnly. Well, we could go right away if Father is willing. And if we could get passports and transportation, said Evelyn. Only I've got to go back and get the baby. The what? Shouted Warren. Why, the baby, said Evelyn. The baby you brought me, the one you brought me from its dead mother. Sure enough, said Warren. Well, where is it, anyway? Back in Warsaw, said Evelyn. I left it with the woman who lived in the corner house. When the soldiers took us away, she came out to see what the disturbance was, and she offered to keep the baby. A baby? Said Warren. So you're going to take it home? Well, that does seem almost the last straw. You don't suppose your friend in Warsaw would like to keep it? No, I don't, said Evelyn firmly. That woman had 6 and her husband was killed and she is ruined. She will have hard enough work feeding her own. She's an angel to keep it for so long. We have dozens of relatives over home and they're all going to have the privilege of helping care for our little war baby. I shall name her for the princess. All right, said Warren. He went to the window and looked out. I wish Father would come, he said. Is Jack with him? Suppose I go and look for them. You will stay right here, said Evelyn. I don't want one of you out of my sight from now on. Jack is with Father. They went out to go to the market. Father has been helping a lot here. He has given the hospital all sorts of things that were badly needed. The princess will send him in as soon as she comes. Isn't it like a fairy tale to think that we had little Rika all the time? I wish you would begin at the beginning and tell me all that happened after you were arrested, said Warren. I have such a lot of scraps. All right, said Evelyn. She looked down at the little sister in her arms. See, she said, she's gone to sleep. The darling is exhausted. Warren looked grave. She has had the worst experience of all, he said. We won't know for a good while just what she has undergone. I would not want to question her. It will have to come out in bits. I think the baby will be a good thing after all. It will help occupy Eleanor's attention and make her forget. Yes, we have got to get out of here as soon as we can on her account. Now, go on. Evelyn cuddled the sleeping child more closely, and commencing at the moment when the soldiers broke down the door, she told her brother the thrilling and almost unbelievable story of their adventure. Finally she reached the end. Warren had made no comments, but the stern and anxious expression of his face betrayed his feelings. Evelyn paused. And to think that I was right on the other side of that door when you were crying yesterday. Poor little sister, I hope you will never, never have to cry for me again. There was a sound of rapid steps at the door. It was flung open, and Jack rushed in, followed by the Professor. Trouble and danger and separation change our viewpoint. There had been a time, not long past, when Warren regarded any demonstration of affection as unmanly. But now he found himself in his father's arms, and only too glad to be there.
End of chapter 11.